Thank you, Christine, and thank you everybody for taking the time today. It's a real pleasure to be here today to talk to you about real climate actions, solutions that exist today that we can all implement to start us on the pathway to achieving drawdown. But first, what is drawdown? Drawdown is that point in time when atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases begin to decline on a year-to-year basis. It's that point when we take out more of those heat-trapping gases than we're putting into Earth's atmosphere. And the proposition is really pretty simple. If we can change the concentrations of the carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases, we can effectively stop global warming and begin the long process of reversing it. In fact, to achieving that point of drawdown is an essential prerequisite to solving the climate emergency that we're facing today and future generations to come. But how do we get there? Well, as a starting point, we have to identify what are the solutions to reduce the sources of those emissions to start with. And once those gases are in the atmosphere, how do we pull them down through natural carbon sinks? And how do we fundamentally look at the way we do business as a society and an economy so that when we're implementing solutions, we do so from a human rights-based approach with justice, equity, and inclusion embedded in the way we do things? Because we have to fundamentally change the system itself to move from a business as usual that is inherently exploitative and extractive to a new way of doing business, a new system that is by nature restorative and regenerative, that has well-being for people and planet at the heart, at the center of everything we do as a society and economy. Well, starting point, what are we doing today? Where are these emissions coming from? Well, emissions come from just about everything we do as a human species. From the electricity that's generated from the coal, oil, and gas-fired plants when we turn on our lights. If we can ask people to put on mute, I love to hear little babies in the background, but if we can go on mute, thank you, super. So, from all that electricity generated to turning on our lights to the gas that's burned in our furnaces when we heat our homes, to the smokestacks that are churning out gases to as we produce all of the stuff that we consume every single day, to the petrol that's burned in internal combustion engines when we turn on our cars, when we move from point A to point B, or when we're flying across the world for meetings or for our leisure travel, to even the food itself, the things that we consume every single day produce emissions, and how we produce that food also contributes to emissions in the atmosphere. So all of that human activity produces energy, produces profit and money, and produces emissions that go into the atmosphere and stay there. Luckily, we have natural ways that happen, again, every single day, every year, that pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through natural process that we all know, the magic and the miracle of photosynthesis, which converts carbon dioxide into plants' biomass and soil organic carbon in our terrestrial or our land sinks, as well as ocean ecosystems. Unfortunately, about 59% of all of the emissions that we put in the atmosphere stay there. That's because we produce so many greenhouse gases, but also those natural sinks have a limited capacity to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And unfortunately, we're degrading and deteriorating these ecosystems at an alarming rate to produce all of the stuff that we consume. So what are the solutions? How do we turn off the sinks to zero? And then how do we turn up the sinks so that we can pull more out of the atmosphere than what's already up there? Now, there are essentially solutions that exist today. There are many solutions that do one or more of three things. First, they reduce all of the stuff, all that we consume, all the electricity that we demand, the food, buildings, space, the stuff that we're demanding on a day-to-day basis can be reduced through technological efficiencies and behavior change. We can replace technologies and practices that are part of the problem, that are contributing to climate change, and replace them with alternatives that are part of the solution. And we can restore carbon to useful forms through those natural sinks that enhance soil productivity, benefit biodiversity, and all life on the planet. And there may be, down the line, value in engineered sinks, mechanical, technological ways of pulling out those carbon, the greenhouse gases, particularly carbon, and using it for useful forms down the line. But we have real existing technologies and practices that exist today that, when taken together as a system of solutions, can achieve that point in drawdown. Now, we have mapped at Project Drawdown. I lead a team of researchers, over 100 researchers from all over the planet have taken part in this project over the last 7 years. And we've mapped, modeled, and described the most substantive technologies and practices, again, that exist today, that when taken together as a system of solutions, can reduce sources to zero, can enhance sinks to achieve drawdown, and can fundamentally start the process of changing society to be more equitable, just, and inclusive. And this drawdown framework is possible. We can achieve it. There are no technologies that we need to invent, though, of course, new technologies, new innovations are going to come along the pipeline, and they're going to help accelerate the process to achieving our goals. But we have everything that we need today to do that. And when we implement these solutions as a system, with well-being at its core, we can go beyond just our climate targets. And I'll get to that in a bit. But first, what are the solutions themselves? Now, we've assessed over 82 existing technologies and practices that are scientifically valid to achieve our goals, that are economically viable, financially feasible, currently being scaled all over the world, and have more positive externalities or more co-benefits to the planet and to humanity than they have negative trade-offs. So these are some of the solutions that you see on this screen here. There are about 25 I've listed here. They're the most substantive in terms of the total amount of carbon dioxide equivalent that are avoided or reduced or sequestered over a 30-year period from 2020 to 2050. And to the right of the slide, you'll see those numbers. That represents gigatons or billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, we have to convert all of those other greenhouse gases, like methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases, into the carbon dioxide equivalent. Why? So that we can compare and contrast these solutions as apples to apples to apples, and aggregate the results as a whole to see how these solutions as a whole can affect the atmosphere. But we have to remember that each of these different types of solutions affect different types of gases that have different lifetimes in the atmosphere and different warming potentials. But we convert them to CO2 equivalent for the purposes of comparing them. So one of the interesting things you'll see is that middle column there. That middle column shows you the different types of sectors. Those areas of human activity that I talked about that produce all of these greenhouse gases to start with, all of those sources and some of those sinks. And what's interesting in these 25 of the most substantive, you see all of those areas of human activity represented. Now, typically when we think about climate solutions, we think about solutions to solve the climate emergency that we're facing. We first go to those coal, oil, and gas-fired plants to replace them with renewable energy systems, renewable electricity. Now, that's absolutely essential because 25% of global greenhouse gases comes from generating electricity, turning on our lights, turning on the lights in our cities, and so on. And there are many technologies, a portfolio of different renewable energy technologies that taken together can get us to that 100% clean renewable grid. And it's absolutely essential that we do that because it's a cornerstone throughout the entire system of solutions. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But you'll see in the top 25 or so, you'll see the things that you're probably most familiar with. Wind and solar, different kinds of solar, different kinds of wind. And they are very substantive, very, very important. But we have to remember there are many other renewable energy systems, wave, tidal, geothermal, bioenergy, microsystems and part of a distributed microgrids as well as grid flexibility taken together allow us to achieve that 100% clean renewable grid. And it's, again, absolutely essential. But where do the other 75% of emissions come from? Well, they come from a lot of areas, all those other areas of human activity, including sectors that use energy, like buildings, industry, and transportation, that consume energy both from the grid, so from that grid that's currently a dirty grid that can be that renewable energy system of the future, as well as combusting fossil fuels on site. And again, that's like turning on our furnaces or the combustion of fossil fuels for industrial purposes. And it's also even in the materials themselves. Some materials like refrigerants or hydrochlorocarbons are really potent greenhouse gases, hundreds to thousands of times more potent than carbon dioxide. And we produce them to capture heat in our refrigerators and air conditioners ubiquitously across the world. Problem is that they leak into the atmosphere through that equipment. And when they leak into the atmosphere, they contribute to global warming at an alarming rate. But we can manage the existing refrigerants, prevent that leakage and destroy those hydrofluorocarbons at the end of life. And we can have alternative refrigerants, new natural refrigerants that can replace those hydrofluorocarbons with alternatives that readily are available. And again, when we think about this, it's about reducing the amount that we're currently using, as well as replacing with alternatives. And the same when we think about our buildings and our insulation and how we use energy in our buildings, and of course, with our transportation purposes. There are readily available technologies at hand that can reduce those emissions and help us get to a zero emission world, not just net zero, but a zero emission world. And then when we think beyond just the energy systems, which is fundamentally important, this is the big shocker, food systems, the importance of how we produce food and what we're consuming and how we're consuming that food makes a difference. Perhaps the most substantive decisions each individual makes on a day-to-day basis, multiple times a day, to stopping and beginning the process of reversing global warming is how we address the food system. And if we think about the food system from start to finish, from production to consumption and end of life, it becomes really obvious all of the energy, all of the emissions that are associated with every single stage of the value chain, from production to harvesting, processing. Think about packaging. Think about all the factories that are churning out emissions to produce plastic, paper, tin, glass, to put our food in, to then put on trucks, trains, ships, and sadly, planes, more and more with luxury commodities, to travel all over the world for our consumption, to in refrigerated containers, to keep that food fresh and frozen, to be overstocked in groceries and markets, to then be over purchased and by consumers who turn on their electric stoves if they're lucky. If they're not so lucky, they're using cook stoves, which are used all over the world and very bad for human health and for the atmosphere and the environment. And then sadly, so much of that gets wasted at the end, which produces methane as that food decomposes, produces that methane, which is more potent than carbon dioxide. So if we think about that value chain as a whole, it becomes really obvious that every crust of bread, every drop of oil, every piece of cheese that we love so much that goes through that value chain produces emissions. So the choices we make about how we produce that food and what we're consuming and avoiding that waste across scales from businesses to individuals across the way becomes incredibly important. And we have to remember that production of food is one of the principal drivers of deforestation and degradation. So again, it becomes even more important when we think about the relationship with land, because the land, or those ecosystems that we talked about, is how drawdown happens every single year through photosynthesis. We see it every year. When we're, so we need to protect our forests to avoid those great storehouses of carbon from entering the atmosphere. But we also need to restore so much of that degraded land so that we can use that degraded land, and humans have done that, have been devastating to the planet. And if we can restore that land, we're actually able to draw down carbon and produce and restore forests, restore for use as well as for protection. So this is how drawdown happens every year. And when we think about this together, we think about our land and oceans and food systems together, these are the most important set of solutions. Why? Because they not only avoid emissions, food, agriculture, and land use account for 24% of global greenhouse gases. That's just one below electricity generation. And if we think about that these can avoid emissions, but also enhance those sinks, enhance the sequestration. This fundamentally shifts our traditional thinking on climate action to not only deal with energy systems, which is fundamentally important. Remember, we have to get there, but also our food and land and natural systems. How and why we are connected to nature represents the most important set of solutions that are readily available to us. But we have to think about it as a system as a whole. And that is not more true when we think about health and education, providing the basic human right to choose when, how, and if to raise a family, and providing equal quality of access, equal access and quality of education to boys and girls for 12 to 15 years of schooling has the effect of dramatically different life choices for families and people. Different economic improvement, improved livelihoods, a delayed onset of marriage, smaller family sizes, more sustainable living practices. All of this happens through education and that basic human right for family planning resources. And that has an effect on the entire system by reducing the expected population growth in the future to more sustainable levels. And that impacts all of the other parts of the system. All of that demand or supply that needs to meet that higher demand for that higher population is reduced by providing this basic human right. But that's how we have to think about the system as a whole. Now, if we think about the system as a whole, many of you, I think, on this call, because you represent businesses all over the world, there are 200 of you from all different sorts of businesses, you're probably thinking, what's the bottom line? What's the bottom line that, the profits, return on that investment for that system that we want to implement, right? That future that we actually want. Well, we've also done a financial analysis of this entire system. And yes, it's going to cost more than what we would have to do anyway. We have to remember when we compare these worlds, we're comparing the business as usual with all of those technologies and practices that are exploitative, extractive, and destroying the planet. And then we compare that with all the solutions. So what are the costs to that? Business as usual versus the system of solutions? Well, we have to invest about $20 to $30 trillion more than what we would have to do anyway over a 30-year period. Now, it sounds like a lot. That's about $1 trillion a year, a fraction, a small drop in the bucket of global GDP to invest in that future that we actually want. But if we think about the financial return, just in terms of operational savings, let alone net profit, but just operational savings of that system of solutions, again, compared to what we'd have to do anyway, that's $95 to $145 trillion in operational savings for the system of solutions that we actually want to have. And so if we think from just a financial perspective, that return on investment, it's a no-brainer. If that it translates, it's what I like to call a duh factor. It's why aren't we doing this when there are so many benefits to human and planetary well-being, and there's a financial return to be had? Well, we'll get to that in a bit. I think one of the reasons this doesn't happen is because it's not really a technology or an economics problem. We have the technology, the economics are there, it makes sense to do. It's a matter of will. It's a matter of will to move farther and faster than we thought possible. And that's partly because of the way we've been approaching climate action to date for the last 25, 30 years. We have been focusing on the problem. We've been focusing on how to fix the problem, identifying the problem, fixing it. Our atmospheric scientists in the world have done a great job in identifying this is a problem. Great. But we've also then focused through that driven by this emotional response of fear to figure out the problem, to fix and tweak things. And in an environment of conflict, of competition, where we're fighting against each other based on fear to fix a problem, and that paradigm has stalled our capacity to move forward faster than we actually need to achieve. We need to fundamentally shift that paradigm, shift the way we do business to a world of solutions. where we have real existing technology, vision where we actually want to be and move towards that direction, not fix or tweak the problem, but figure out where we want to move in the future, what the possibility of those solutions are in the future. And instead of working and competing in conflict, we can work in collaboration, working together by linking arms to achieving the future that we actually want. Because if we start to see this new paradigm of solutions, the possibility of the solutions and working together, suddenly these are opportunities, right? Not fixing, not problem solving, but opportunities to create the future that we actually want. And in order to do that, we have to name what that future is. We have to set that marker on the horizon, leading us to where we want to go. When we think about when we go on a hike, when we go on a walk, we see in the distance that mountain, the hilltop. We'd have to name that's where we want to go before we could even think about getting there. So we have to name where we want to be. No half measures, no partial distances. We got to go to the future that we actually want, see that vision of the future, reimagine what that is, and take the first step on the pathway to that future, that horizon, because that's how we're going to actually make the substantive difference. And the great thing is we can reimagine the future. We can reimagine the system because we have technologies and practices that already exist. We can imagine a future where all of our energy is provided in abundance. We can have that regenerative economy of abundance when we think about transferring our energy systems away from that extraction based on an economy of death of fossil fuels to one of life, one of natural resources through our wind resources or our solar, like every other form of life on the planet, utilizing the power of the sun to fuel our human activity, both in urban and in rural environments. We have to remember that these are solutions that are not in the purview of rich industrialized countries or urban centers alone. These are solutions for everybody. These are solutions for high income and low income, for rural and for urban environments. And they have cascading benefits. When we think about a renewable energy system, it's not just about avoiding emissions. It's about improving air quality, reducing air pollution, health outcomes, educational attainment, improving livelihoods. We see this renewable, clean, abundant energy system of the future providing co-benefits to all people on this planet. We can reimagine our way we move around the world, our mobility choices with joy. We can choose to use electric bikes and scooters. We can reimagine public transit to make it sexy, make it beautiful. I love the metro in Paris. It's beautiful. We want to use those public transport options because we are investing in incentivizing people to make those choices. We can reimagine that future to be beautiful and filled with joy and powered by renewable energy systems, right? And we can fundamentally change the way we work. We're doing that right now as in beaming across the planet, conveying ideas and messages, thoughts, and work. And we're privileged. We have to remember we're privileged to be able to do that. Not everybody can. These essential workers who have to go to work have to continue to do that. But when we make choices as companies, as individuals, to support telepresence, to avoid that business travel flying all over the world, or even avoiding the commute times, jumping into our cars and commuting into our work environments by choosing to work from home. And doing that reduces emissions dramatically across the board, but also it reduces congestion, reduces air pollution, and creates more efficient utilization of time for work. Reducing those commute times is really important. And that provides us more opportunities to be closer, spend more time with our families, our friends, neighbors, and communities. It's a win-win-win set of solutions. We need to reimagine how we use and create all the stuff that we're consuming. Of course, reduce it as a starting point, right? Reduce it as a starting point. But if we think about, instead of extracting more and more and more of our limited resources from the planet, reusing what we have already extracted over and over and over again as part of a circular economy. A circular economy, we can reduce emissions and benefit the planet. And we can rethink how we live in that planet, changing our built environment to not only operational emissions, so reducing all those energy usage in buildings from all of the building systems and appliances that we can be more efficient with, right? We can also change the very things, the very stuff that the buildings are made of to make it part of the embodied emissions of the buildings, to make it part of the solution, to make them drawdown buildings, to make them climate positive buildings that are benefiting the planet instead of being a net emitter, a net source. And we can change how the very stuff itself, again, moving away from materials that are extracted and churning out emissions we need to produce, to an economy built on life, built not on death, but on life, where we can be restored and regenerative bamboo, over 500 native species across the planet and more. This taking currently degraded land, again, currently degraded land, and using it to produce materials for our bio-based regenerative economy of the future. Bamboo can be used for buildings, for bridges, for bikes, bicycles, even for clothing itself. So this is rethinking that future economy to be built on life and not death, and to be regenerative in nature. And for that degraded land that is applicable for natural regrowth, we can protect that degraded land and allow restoration to happen in both temperate environments and in tropical ecosystems. And this pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stores it in soil organic carbon, restoring soil health and productivity of that soil, as well as capturing the carbon dioxide in biomass, but perhaps more importantly, restoring biodiversity, which is being which is dying off at an alarming rate because of our human activities. And that also requires to reimagine protecting all of our forests, all of our extant ecosystems, because we can do that. And in doing so, we protect all of that stored carbon, these great storehouses of carbon that, if released in the atmosphere, is a tipping point that we may not be able to solve. So we need to protect our current ecosystems, as well as, but this also protects biodiversity. We're expected to lose 1 million species over the next 10 years because of our activities. We protecting our forests and restoring our forests, we protect and restore biodiversity. We can do the same in our ocean ecosystem. We can reimagine that future to protect kelp forests, restore kelp forests, and protecting and restoring those trophic pyramids, our fishing stocks, and the health of our ocean systems. And we can reimagine, again, that bio-based regenerative economy utilizing feedstocks coming from the ocean. Seaweed can be used for human consumption, livestock consumption, as well as those bio-based materials that we need for that regenerative economy. We can fundamentally reimagine that future of food production to make it regenerative in nature instead of extractive and ultimately degrading the land, which our modern industrial agriculture does, degrades land. It turns into a net emitter of carbon dioxide, turns into fallow land, because it promotes tillage, which churns the soil, releasing all that soil organic carbon, promotes monoculture, use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, which are high energy intensity production items. And this has a net effect of destroying our land and reducing yield, outputs, and so on. But regenerative annual cropping and the many other regenerative agricultural practices that are available to us, readily available, restore soil health and productivity. They improve water retention, increase yield, and they benefit smallholder farmers across the world and large farming operations alike. And perhaps more importantly, they bring carbon back to the land. These are the win-win-win sets of solutions when we rethink how we approach our way we produce food to doing it the way we've been doing it for millennia, because regenerative annual cropping is nothing new. This is how we've been producing food for countless generations, and indigenous peoples and smallholder farmers across the world still practice regenerative forms of agriculture, but they're regularly being replaced by modern agriculture, driven by economics and our global economy. So when we think about this, we need to shift the way we produce food, have produced food, tried and true methods that are beneficial across the board. But we have to also think about what we're consuming itself. Remember, I talked about this a little bit earlier, what we're consuming to produce, to consume a more healthy, plant-rich, or beautiful, eat more of those beautiful plants. It's not a vegetarian or vegan. I know all the folks in France, I love eating meat. I as well, I do continue to eat meat, but at healthy levels, reducing your overall consumption to healthy levels, and really rethinking how we overconsume so much of that food in high-income countries, and also raising the protein and nutrient levels of low-income countries to healthy levels. That has an effect of overall reducing the amount of food consumed, and particularly the amount of meat now and in the future. That has the effect of reducing emissions from production, as well as avoiding all of that emissions that would be required to, from land conversion needed to supply these diets. So we need to we change our diets itself and reduce our food loss and waste. Now, again, food loss and waste is one of the dumbest things we do as a species. If you ask me, 30 to 40% of all food that is produced is not even consumed, right? So at a time when 800 million people in the world are going hungry, we can eliminate hunger by reducing the amount of food that gets lost and waste across the system, early in the supply chain in low-income countries, and in high-income countries at the end of the supply chain by consumers, which purchase too much, and ultimately throw too much away. So with about 30, 40% of food loss, all of that food that gets wasted decomposes in its methane, which produces more global warming effect, higher temperatures, climate change. If we reduce that, prevent that food waste and loss from happening to start with, we can redirect it to markets where people are in need, as well as overall reduce the amount of needs to be produced, reduce the strains on our ecosystems, reduce the land conversion. All of that taken together can be one of the most substantive solutions that we have that individuals can take every single day. Now, of course, back to family planning, we can reimagine a world where everybody has equal access to reproductive health care, to make the freedom to choose how, if, when, and how to raise a family, by providing the basic human right. This is about human rights. It's about justice. It's about gender equality. It's about economic improvement. It's about freedom. It's not about climate. Climate's just a third, fourth order benefit. Like, it's just far down the line. It's a basic human rights approach that we need for every person on this planet, and we can imagine that future system where that's possible. And we can also imagine a world where every child across the planet has that access to education. It's not inconceivable at all. It's not even that much money to do. We can do this and provide this equal access and provide entirely different futures for every person on this planet. And that has an effect across the entire system, not only in terms of the increased uptake of family planning resources. That's what we see in the effective population, is that more and more people take up family planning when they have 12 to 13 years of schooling. But when we embed in that educational system, understanding of the connections between humanity and nature and the planet and sustainability and regenerative systems, is part of that educational profile, we can also see an increased uptake of all of these solutions across the board. And we have to think about this as the system of solutions, where we can reimagine all of these solutions and the many more that we profile. All of them have cascading benefits to human and planetary well-being, and they all are implementable because they exist today and they're already being implemented. It's how we can accelerate the implementation of these solutions farther and faster. And we need to, because there's an urgency. But the importance thing to remember is that there's no silver bullet, no subset of technologies or practices that are going to get us there. There's not the top 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. We need all of the solutions across all of those areas of human activity to achieve our goals. It's actually a requirement. And we have to think about that system of solutions as a whole, because we need to reimagine the system as a global system of systems where all of these different sectors are intersecting, right? There are no silos of activity. There's no sectors that are just going to do it. Everything is interconnected, and through feedstocks, interaction effects, and system dynamics. And all of the results that we show on the financial implications, the climate implications, are all based on an integrated system where we deal with all of those interaction effects, stock and flow issues, and system dynamics, because that's how we have to actually envision the system, because that's the reality of the system. And then when we do that, we see the reality of the system as an interconnected web where we have all of these solutions together, drawdown suddenly becomes possible. We can achieve our emissions reductions across those scenarios over this 30-year time period to, first of all, align with the 2 degrees Celsius warming target. That first scenario aligns to achieving a 2-degree warming target by 2100 And this is the composition of those solutions that achieve that in terms of their gigatons of reduced CO2 equivalents. Now you'll see all the solutions are there. We need all of them to achieve a 2-degree warming target. We can be more ambitious and achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target. It's possible to achieve. Again, with a system of solutions, we need them all. The order of those solutions may change, and that's to be expected because of how urgently and ambitiously we move with one or another solution. And in fact, there's going to be new solutions that come along. There's going to be different approaches, different ways of implementing them, and new solutions that come along, and new data is going to happen. So these order may change, but the important thing to remember is the system itself needs to change. We need all of these solutions together to achieve our goals. And when we do this, when we achieve the drawdown system, we can utilize the climate emergency to be the catalyst as a system of solutions to achieve our other global goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, to achieve a more sustainable, just planet, ending poverty, ending hunger, improving health and education, etc. These targets, these goals, going beyond our climate goals to achieving sustainable development goals becomes possible because all of the solutions that we have to achieving our solving the climate emergency are all linked to the achievement or one or more of the sustainable development goals. Why? Because they all have cascading benefits to human and planetary well-being. We remember when we think about energy systems, about pollution, health, education, quality, etc. All of these solutions can create that system to help us achieve sustainable development goals. And you'll see SDG 17 here at the one end there. And SDG 17 is about partnerships. It's about how we work together, from corporate to investors to governments, working together with communities to implement all of these solutions, and then have the effect of achieving our goals. But when we think about it as a system of solutions, suddenly regeneration becomes possible. We go beyond sustainability. Let's think beyond the limited constraints of a sustainable planet, sustainable resources that exist essentially with the status quo, making it more sustainable. Let's move beyond to regenerative systems, a regenerative economy, where we're creating abundance, where well-being is placed at the core, not just profit, but well-being for people and planet is the core operating principle of our economy. And we can produce us everything that we need in abundance without extraction, without exploitation. This is possible, but only when we reimagine those existing systems. To move away from a hierarchical model and all the power structures of that global economy to a new kind of regenerative system, an organic system based on imagining that resilience ecosystem where we're going to see different solutions across these areas of activity and needs being organically, dynamically evolving together. And we're going to see new things come and new interactions happening. We see and re-envision this like an ecosystem. We can create a more resilient, adaptable, dynamic system of the future that is regenerative in nature, that creates abundance, because all of these are opportunities again, opportunities to create that future that we want with things that are readily available. We can build together a regenerative future with the things that we know work. And when we reimagine this future to be one of solutions, possibility, and collaboration, linking arms together, because we are the regeneration. We're the generation that matters most, because the decisions that we make today affect our own livelihoods, affect our children, our grandchildren, all future generations to come. We are the regeneration, and not just generation X, Y, or Z. There's no more generation X, Y, Z. What comes next? We're one regeneration coming together, linking arms for intergenerational action to envision and create that future that we actually want to achieve, to choose the future that we want, right? To choose the future. And we can do that together, and now's the opportunity to do that. And you are all part of the solution already. You're here probably because you're already doing solutions. Many people ask me, like, what can I do? I say, first thing first, look inside, look into yourself and figure out, what are the things I'm actually already doing? Don't approach your first step on the pathway to the regenerative future that we need, that we want, saying in a place of guilt or shame or blame. honor what you are already doing, respect what you're doing, and realizing that you've already taken a step on that direction. So I want you to all think about, as we go into the Q&A session, what are the solutions you are already doing? What are the things that you can say, you can honor and respect in your own livelihoods, your lives, or through your companies, or through your communities? What are you already doing? And I also want you to think, where are the other opportunities to take action? Once you've taken your first step, you can take the next one and the next one and the next one. Where can you move beyond in the system of solutions to take the next step on your pathway towards the regenerative future that we all choose together by linking arms? I'm happy to answer questions. I hope I'm not too over time, but thank you so much. And please ask some good questions. I'm happy to take that and reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to answer and follow up with you all. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and questions.